Criminal charges against Ontario cops who killed a baby are dropped. Teaching assistants at McGill go on strike. Art gallery workers in Toronto also go on strike. Doctors and patients oppose bill in Nova Scotia that would give health minister access to personal medical information. UN Security Council passes a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. And Instagram opts users into seeing less political news without their permission. Good morning. It's Tuesday, March 26th. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. Let's start today in Ontario, where criminal charges against 3 provincial police who shot and killed a baby have been dropped. The 3 OPP constables, Nathan Vanderhayden, Kenneth Pengelly, and Grayson Kappas, were facing 1 count each of manslaughter, aggravated assault, and reckless discharge of a firearm in relation to the 2020 killing of 18-month-old Jameson Shapiro. The 3 policemen killed Jameson in a car with his father, 33-year-old William Shapiro. William had abducted Jameson earlier that day. In the shots fired by the police, Jameson died instantly, while his father died in hospital a few days after the incident. Reporting by CBC News shows that the officers knew there was a child in the truck they were chasing and that he was in the driver's seat with his dad. That's right. They knew and they shot at the car anyway and they killed him, and they've been cleared of facing criminal charges. Crown attorney Ian Bulmer withdrew the charges on Monday, saying that he had no evidence to disprove the officers' story that they were acting in self-defense and that a conviction in this case would not be likely. It's unbelievable that we live in a society where people who, let's say, vandalized a store with paint and posters are facing criminal charges, where 3 members of the Ontario Provincial Police shot and killed a baby, knowing that a baby was inside the truck, and that for them, there's no reasonable possibility of a conviction. It's disgusting. It's so disgusting. And right there, you can't reform that, folks. You can't reform that. Next, a story that was mentioned yesterday, and I'm bringing you more details today. 1,600 teaching assistants at McGill were officially on strike starting yesterday. The teaching assistants voted nearly 88% in favor of an 8-week strike mandate late last week. Negotiations for a new collective agreement started in September, with the union saying it's been at the table with the university administrators 18 times. The big issue? Wages, which McGill teaching assistants say are significantly lower than pay at comparable universities like the University of Toronto. The teaching assistants also want to see changes made to the number of allocated hours per semester to resemble the actual workload. Teaching assistants are, in many ways, the backbone of undergraduate education at universities. They attend lectures, create tutorial sessions, grade assignments, support undergraduate students with their assignments, manage administrative duties, and the list goes on. Without them, lecturers and professors would be unable to manage the workload of teaching an undergraduate class, especially as cramming more and more students into an undergraduate class is a way that universities have tried to make more money off of students. This strike at McGill comes as a similar strike is still taking place at York University in Toronto. That strike has been going on since last month. Next, more strike news, and this time we'll go to the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, where workers are ready to walk off the job this morning. City News' Alex Arsenich is reporting that 430 workers decided to go on strike after 10 months of fruitless negotiations. The workers are represented by OPSU, Local 535. They've been fighting contracting out, loss of full-time jobs, and lower salaries. Management at the AGO might want to be careful with these guys. These are the workers who know what kind of money is being laundered through art, and if they're pushed far enough, they might spill the beans. Next, doctors and patients in Nova Scotia are raising the alarm about a new bill that would give the government too much access to personal medical information. Earlier this month, a bill was introduced to make changes to the Personal Health Information Act. The changes would give the health minister access to personal medical information to, quote, plan and manage the health system, resource allocation, and creating or maintaining electronic health records, programs, and services, unquote. The people who have concerns about the changes being made have asked that increased safeguards on privacy be included in the bill. Those calls have so far been ignored. Doctors in Nova Scotia say that the government did commit to having an oversight committee to track how data is being used and proposed a change to the bill that would ensure that future governments abide by any privacy protections that are implemented. Now to international news. The United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. 14 council members voted in favor of it, while the United States abstained. In the last few months, when a ceasefire resolution has been put to a vote, the U.S. has typically vetoed it. Progress, a little bit. The resolution calls for a ceasefire for the remainder of Ramadan, which would only be about 2 more weeks, as we're more than halfway through the month. It does say that a pause in fighting should lead, quote, to a permanent, sustainable ceasefire, unquote, which is what is desperately needed and is what Palestinian activists and their allies have been calling for. The resolution also called for the release of all remaining hostages taken in the October 7th attack. In protest of the U.S.'s abstention, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu canceled a planned delegation's visit to Washington. The delegation was supposed to present details of a planned ground invasion in northern Gaza and Rafah. It's pretty bizarre to cancel their delegation in protest, and the delegation was actually just going to give war plans. There's a ceasefire, so there are no war plans, so I guess weird protest. Netanyahu, okay. A reminder that Rafah is where over 1 million Palestinians have sought shelter from the war. The United Nations and various human rights organizations have repeatedly said that a ground invasion of Rafah would be catastrophic. And late last night, reports came from Rafah that the population was under heavy bombardment. And finally, this is not news that I care about, but I don't know, you probably do. If you've been on Instagram lately, which I certainly have not, or if that's where you get your news, you might have noticed less political content in your feed. That's because the social media platform quietly rolled out an update that suppressed political content from accounts that users didn't already follow. Instagram defines political content in very broad terms. It can include posts discussing laws, governments, elections, or undefined, quote-unquote, special topics. Social media is where young people between 15 and 24 increasingly get their news. And folks, try to get a newspaper. They're so good. Newspapers are so good. I just realized this past weekend that Le Devoir, of course, still publishes a hard copy newspaper, and I will be purchasing a subscription to just get my newspapers back. Social media is also where people turn to get perspectives they would not find anywhere else. And actually, really importantly, is where you turn for breaking news, like the news that the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore has been hit by a boat and has completely collapsed. By now, I'm sure you've seen the video of that. Now, on Instagram, take the war on Gaza, for an example, where local journalists are reporting on the genocide on social media as mainstream news continues to fail to give the full story its due coverage. This bill also comes from the limitations of accessing news content on the platform in response to Bill 18. Users can turn off this setting, and many people have posted instructions on how to do it online. So if you want to make sure that you're getting political content on Instagram, well, go to your settings and turn on that setting or find the instructions on how to do it. I've seen it kind of a couple of times. It should be pretty easy to find. Those are your headlines for Tuesday, March 26th. I'm Nora. You're listening to this podcast at sandynora.com on the Real News Network podcast feed and anywhere you get your podcasts. And folks, it's Tuesday. That is Sandy and Nora Day. The episode comes out in a couple of hours. I got to say, in this one, I accidentally deleted all the files as I was working on it last night, and I thought that I would have to re-record my half of the episode this morning. Amazingly, I was able to restore everything, but there's a lot of sweat and a couple of tears that goes into today's episode. Hope that you like it. Don't forget, subscribe and like the podcast if you haven't ever done that before. And if you can share it, we would really appreciate it. Our only hope to expand our audience is through word of mouth. And so if you could word of mouth our podcast, we would love that.